We brought together today probably over 100 years of experience of people on the front lines, building homes, designing homes, being involved in that. I've mentioned I built 3 homes, and I've hired Doug Leach here, a South Bay native, local architect for over 25 years, and I don't know how many hundreds of homes he's designed, a foremost expert. We have Patrick Cunningham, a design and build company, also a local South Bay native who partnered up with his brother back in the 80s and has built hundreds of homes, I think over 250 homes. Is that right, Patrick? We have Phil Norman next to him, an amazing designer. When you want to know anything about what goes on in the inside and in picking things, this guy knows it all. And Todd Wool at the end owns a company called Conserve Development, who works on this side of taking some of the homes that you see here that are not quite teardowns and transforming them into new and beautiful homes. So it's from a different level. So with that, I'm going to take a seat and start asking you guys some questions. We will open it up to you guys for questions from the group as well. And I'm going to start with Patrick. You've designed and built homes for many years. What would you say has been the biggest change in the construction in the last 10 years?
So with construction, aside from the architectural aspect of it, the permitting beginning there has been changing over the years to where it takes more time. The involvement of code change over every 3 years, we get a change in the code that affects how the building is built with seismic. So the strength of the way that we design the building equates to more dollars. So that has been a big effect. Materials on the house, you see people are using more durable products. For example, wood siding now is going to a more cementitious type material, hardy plank. So seeing that is a construction change. Where the house lighting system, as you mentioned earlier, that's becoming more and more of a request. The smart homes, that's a huge thing with the technology. So, you know, definitely the budget has increased in those 2 line items, and you're correct. They're not typically in the typical construction budget that you look at originally. They're not included in there because they can go from $25,000 to $125,000 for those components, the electrical and the AV. Another thing is the water conservation with regards to stormwater. We're having to, on each sites now, control the stormwater, so that's equating to expenses where, like up in Rancho Palos Verdes, you have to harvest the water and have big tanks. And one project we're doing right now, they're spending $40,000 on capturing their own water. In Los Angeles, the LID, which they call the low impact, that's a huge impact, and that on any project is adding from $15,000 to $20,000 to create these planners where all the water runoff from the roof is channeling through the downspouts, going into the subterranean drain system into one location, and then that planter that you built is filtering all the water, which you as the homeowner are responsible for taking care on your own site. And with Governor Brown, with what he's done, they're going to become more stringent as time goes on. So those are a few things in the construction world.
Thanks. And while you have the mic, I was going to ask you a question. You know, I just randomly threw out $300 a square foot. I know when I built my first home budgets back in '99 were around $50 a square foot. Do you see an average today for the homes from Palos Verdes to Los Angeles on a price per square foot basis?
I would say on the low end, maybe $250 to $275 a square foot, and then the majority are around $325, and then you've got the ones that are spending it all and $500 and above.
Doug, same question. As it relates to architecture, what changes have you seen?
Well, this first one is probably not a change, but the open floor plan, everybody wants an open floor plan. Everybody wants the kitchen open to the great room and open to the backyard. So that is still with us and probably will continue to be so. The elimination of the living room has happened. I've done big houses, like an 8,000 square foot house recently that did not have a living room. So most people particularly the tree section, I would say, are not interested in having a living room. They don't want to have a room when you first walk into the house that nobody's ever going to use anyway. So the kitchen, what happens when you don't have a living room is that the other rooms get bigger, and you get a bigger kitchen, you get a bigger great room, a bigger breakfast nook. So it's a good trade-off, in my opinion. And the kitchen itself has become probably the single most important room in the house. These kitchens and the appliances that go in them is just where everybody gravitates to, and therefore the kitchen's a big deal. We spent a lot of time figuring out how the kitchen's going to work.
Great, thank you. Phil, when it comes to interior finishes, what do you see the market trending towards right now, and why?
What we've seen the biggest trend in is ease of lifestyle. I'd say it's fair to say I work with a lot of young families or just busy families in general that want to come home after a busy workday and not necessarily be a slave to their house. So we work in a lot of low maintenance materials, whether it be new porcelain slabs that are available out there, solid surfaces like some of the buzzwords, silestone, cosentino, things like that. Those are often used a little bit more often nowadays. Porcelain tile has come a long way in its new adventures, and I think just the tile market in general, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, a lot of granite on countertops, tumbled travertine on the backsplash, call it a day, everyone's happy and you're done. Just doesn't happen that way anymore. The reinvention of common materials, so you might have used a limestone 10 years ago. It's still being used today, but what's happening is that they're flaming it, they're bushmilling it, they're leathering it, so it's essentially reinventing itself into 2-3 more materials. So I think clients are interested in getting their eyes open to all the new materials and new tiles. A lot of new tiles on the market.
Todd, as an expert in reinventing homes, what has proven to be the most significant change that you make to an old home to appeal to today's home buyers?
Well, I would say our goal is to take your old homes that we either buy, Spec, or even JV, and make them today for today's market. Homes from the 1940s and 50s, as you said, living rooms, great rooms didn't exist, large kitchens. All the rooms were very isolated, very compartmentalized. So for us, we want to take the old home and make it what we call contemporary for today's market. And by doing so, sometimes there's a tremendous amount of reconfiguration within the house, changing the footprint of the bedrooms, number of bathrooms, how the kitchen orients itself to a great room, a family room, as Doug was saying. You're right, living rooms are pretty much a thing of the past. And also taking into account aging. The population today, we have found families want to have a guest quarters for their in-laws, for their outlaws. Anybody that they want to have at the house, maybe not too close to them, just a little far enough away, but within the house. So making that house comfortable enough that you could have other family members. We are finding that to be a big trend. So it's really, as I always say, it's like baking a cake. Each house takes on its own life from what it was for the past, in some cases, 40, 50 years. And when we're done, it will feel like it is a brand new home today. It just didn't have all of those big costs.
Patrick, when a homeowner finally starts that process towards building a new home with you or others, what do you think is the biggest number one surprise that they run into in this process?
Selections are the most important thing for the homeowner to make, for the builder to have, to be able to move in production at a good pace. But I think that when owners are introduced to a selection request, and then they're introduced to how many different items are available out there, they're surprised at how many choices that they can and have to make. And that's when it gets, what we've seen, overwhelming with the clients. So that's a big surprise. And that's where someone like Phil comes in to help in with the interior design and put it all together, because if you're doing it alone and you're taking a look at just the simple tile, as he discussed how many different treatments you can give to it, it can get very confusing. So that amount of work, back to what you said, where you find yourself leaving work to go to the house, those decisions are so many. It's surprising. It's not what you're never prepared properly for that.
How about you, Doug? When you sit down with a buyer who's never built or designed a home, what is it they must know to help guide them in creating the right home for them?
Well, I think that they need to, it's always beneficial with my clients that they write down the wish list and don't just tell me verbally, but actually spend some time writing it down, because once you start writing it down, you think of things that you didn't think of when you were just talking about it. So writing down what your wish list is in terms of what rooms you want, maybe even what size of rooms you expect those rooms to be. And when I sit down with a client, the first thing I do is figure out what rooms do you want and where should those rooms be on this specific piece of property, taking into account view, neighbors' houses that are 2-story or 1-story, the way the sun is traveling, all these different factors that go into laying out a floor plan. But I also think that a new homeowner that's about to build needs to be very realistic with how big the house is going to get and how long it's going to take to build. And that's more of Patrick's area, but I think the days are gone when people will be throwing up a house in 9 months. It seems like it always is a year and a half. And if you don't have that in your mind to begin with, it could get very frustrating as the house seems to linger towards the end.
Doug, you again. What do you think is the biggest challenge you run into with homeowners?
I think it's many of my clients come in and they get too locked in, and I tell them this at the beginning. They get too locked into what ideas that they have. And I think it's good for any designer to kind of stay free, don't get too locked in at the beginning of the whole design phase. I try to keep a real open mind, and I tell my clients to try to keep a very open mind as well, because it's a process. And usually my clients have very, very good ideas that they bring to the table that we try to incorporate. But if you get so locked in that you have to have something that is just not possible, then it can cause some disappointment. So just keep your mind free at the beginning of the process.
Todd, over on the other end of the table, when it comes to focusing on return for investment, what do you think gets the highest return, and what do you think gets the lowest return?
I think a lot of the buyers today really want to focus on a great experience in the backyard, number one. So how can the kids use the backyard? Fireplaces, we just put in a basketball court, sports court in a house, a bocce ball court in another house, a seating, an outdoor living space. So that's a great value. Master bathroom, ensuite, tub, shower, spa feel. Everybody likes to use the word spa. Well, there's truth to it. You want to feel like you're in a hotel, but you're in your bedroom, in your bathroom. I would also say to you the great room in the kitchen, because those, as Doug said, that's your real living space. On the other side, it's very easy to get wrapped up in spending $20 for a drawer knob, or $15 for a pull for a closet, or $5,000 for the way your closet looks once you open up the doors. And I would say to you, audiovisual, because everything goes obsolete today in a matter of a very short time. So those things that we really never put in homes, never, because of the obsolescence factor. So it's a real balance, Ed.
Phil, what do you think is the most important component in today's home as it relates to both design and value?
Well, we spend a lot of time on space planning, so we'll get maybe an architectural plan from Doug, which is very hard to improve upon. We hardly ever find any errors in his plans, of course. But we do go through that and fine-tune the space planning of the home to make sure that the door swings are proper, that there's actually furniture placed in each room that is proper scale and properly thought out. A lot of times we'll catch disproportionate rooms because I think in their mind, they just look at a piece of paper and they think their family room exists on that piece of paper. And our job as an interior design firm is to show them, what the layout's actually going to, what's going to happen in there. So as far as the value, having a really good space plan, really thought out, the flow works. And I think that's one of the most important things, natural light being another one. And just well thought out, have a plan. If your resources allow you to hire a professional team of experts and to think out these things, the construction will go at a little bit of a quicker pace. You'll have the anxiety lessened, hopefully, because you won't get your contractor calling you wanting to make decisions immediately. So if you have a plan that's well thought out, you'll be happier in the end.
Patrick, when picking a builder, what would you say are a couple of things to look for, or more importantly, watch out for?
To look for, you definitely want to work with an experienced builder, someone who has done it before and understands the area. For example, you want a local South Bay contractor working in Manhattan Beach. There's some challenges there. What to look out for? You'd want to make sure that you don't go with the lowest price. That's obvious, but that, believe it or not, when we're competitively bidding against another contractor and we check in later and we find out that they had the lower price, and then we check in again a year later and we find out that the price climbed back up. So be cognizant that could be the trap that you're getting caught in. You spend a lot of time with your builder, so you want to interview multiple builders, make sure that you feel comfortable with that individual, because you're going to have, like Ed said, you're going to have weekly meetings with that contractor, and there's a lot of discussion. And building a house, there's emotional roller coaster that you go through, for you're doing things that become frustrating sometimes, and you want to make sure that you're working with somebody that is consultative to explain you through it and is a calm demeanor, and make sure that that you can work together, because you've all heard the story about someone having a builder that they're at war every day, every week, and you don't want to have that.
And Doug, what about when picking an architect? What's the decision process that someone should go through in choosing their architect?
I guess my response would be you want to choose somebody who has done many houses in the style that you like, that you want to do. Occasionally, I get a client who is not sure what style they want to do, so we'll do a Spanish colonial house, and we'll do a craftsman house, and give them two different elevations to look at. But I think you want to choose ultimately somebody that's done the style that you like. Like, for example, there's a lot of great architects that work in Manhattan Beach, and I would not be a good fit for if you wanted to do a real cutting-edge contemporary house. There's architects in town that do a fantastic job with that style, but it's not a style that I'm well versed at. So I think also that you want somebody that knows the city that you're working in, kind of what Patrick was saying about a builder. I think that applies to architect too. Manhattan Beach is a great city to work in if you're an architect, but the book of planning rules is about this thick, and there's hundreds and hundreds of rules that can bite you. And if you're not working with somebody that knows the city of Manhattan Beach, oftentimes you get disappointed when you get further down the road and find out that the house you wanted, that you designed, is not going to get approved.
When it comes to budgeting, what are things you can do to control it, watch out for? And I'll stay with you, Doug, on this. How do you control your budget?
Well, obviously, square footage of the house relates to the budget. The more bathrooms you have, obviously, that's the expensive area. Kitchen is an expensive area. So try to stay realistic in the size of the house that you'd like to build. In Manhattan Beach, as I'm sure you probably know, most of the lots are governed by specific rules. Well, I should say all the lots are governed by specific rules on how much you can build. And typically you spend so much money for the property that you want to max out how much you can build. But just be careful with that. Sometimes too big is not better. So just keep a rein in on the square footage.
Pat, same question. Do any of your customers ever go over budget?
Yeah, it depends. Every project will go over budget, and we guarantee that to the clients. We guarantee it. And what percentage it is, it depends on the client and how disciplined they are. But what we can do as a professional helping the client is to do, my brother, who's my partner, we term it as a false start. If we don't do our homework up front thoroughly enough, then there's going to be overruns. And so, for example, you can get plumbing fixtures, a standard allowance that Kohler would have, and you'd have this list that might equate to $16,000. But in reality, you're going to spend $20,000 when you go shopping. So before the job starts, you need to do the homework. And the homework is to go shopping and find out, is that $16,000 that you've allocated realistic? And if not, then you've got to change that number before construction starts to $20,000. Allowances through a construction budget could be 50 items. So that means there's a lot of homework that has to be done. A lot of builders want to rush to get the shovel in the ground and start construction and don't want to worry about doing the homework and making sure the allowances are correct. That project's heading for a disaster because the client is going to stick their hand in the pocket every single time they come to a allowance item. It's not going to be adequate, and then frustration is going to be all the way through the project. So management of the budget up front, the allowances.
Phil, how would you handle that?
I would say at the beginning of the project, when you do have the most of your money, know that it's a marathon, not a sprint. So I think a lot of people get really excited at the beginning of the project, and I think the spending rate at the beginning of the project is fast and furious. And then as you get further along, there's still many important decisions to be made, and you get a little tighter on resources to make those decisions. So just be careful and just spread that out on the entire process. Be smart when you're designing key rooms like kitchens or master bathrooms. Go ahead and allow yourself maybe some upgrades in those rooms where they're going to be probably better experienced by you and your friends and your family. And then the back bathrooms, drop back, pull some, cut some corners back there, do less expensive cabinetry, less expensive tile, and a professional designer or builder is going to be able to guide you through that process as well. I find sometimes when clients are trying to tighten the budget, we'll go for appliance packages. So a lot of times if you're picking out, if a Thermador is a brand that you like, you can couple a Thermador range with a refrigeration system and down the line, which they'll reduce your appliance packages. That helps quite a bit. Multiple bids on a project is always good without being ridiculous. 2-3 bids isn't bad to get like in cabinetry and things like that. And then the last, I'd say on the AV, to Todd's comment, the AV audio visual, just qualify yourself as, where are you? Are you good, better, best? Because that swing can be so huge. And if you're not going to notice the finest, little perception in a speaker, then it's okay to, drop down to mid or low. So qualify what holds value for you as an individual, because it's not the same for everybody.
Todd, I'm going to go the opposite way. When do you think it's okay to spend more or spend too much? Maybe think back when you built your own home, because you built your own home as well.
Yes.
When did you feel it was okay to spend a little extra?
Well, again, if you're going to spend on your own account, and so you're going to live in the home, you, of course, want to treat yourself to things that you want. But what is that fine line? I could almost guarantee you that I could walk you through any new home today in Manhattan Beach, in the South Bay, and say to you, I could have saved you $1,500 in that guest powder room, or $500 in the office, or maybe $10,000 in the kitchen. And in the end, some of those prices that whoever spent that did what they did it for either what they wanted, or in the end, they just felt that was a need. There's such a varying degree, as all these professionals have said, in what is really good eyeball appeal and what is functional and what is over the top. And so my job is really to try to rein it in, use a lot of logic, because in the end, I want to take what's old and make it new again. So I don't have the luxury of starting from scratch.
Doug, you've probably seen more of your homes sell in this marketplace when they're done or resell in the marketplace. You've made decisions with your clients to do something to the home that you know would cost more, whether it was size or design. Where are some of those areas you thought really paid off for these people?
My response would be to make your wife happy. That's what it's all about for the guys. Guys just want to know how much it's going to cost, but ultimately it's the wife that drives the show. So make her happy. Give her the big closet. Give her the extra appliance in the kitchen, not the garage. Spending money on kitchens, and I'm being a little bit redundant of what I said before, but that's a good place to spend money. Spending money in the master bathroom, that's a great place to spend money. And will always pencil out for you on resale should you have to sell the house.
When you work on architecture, you like to start from scratch. At what point do you advise a client, or does someone decide that trying to fix something really just isn't the right direction and tearing it down makes a lot more sense? And
a few years ago, my wife and I decided to build a house on our property that we had purchased about 25 years ago. And it was your typical 1950s house, had 3 little bedrooms and a little living room and a little kitchen. And we contemplated hanging on to it because it had a lot of charm and adding on a second story, et cetera. But at the end of the day, we realized that we would not be getting the house that we really want. We'd be getting a house that still had 8-foot ceilings. And by the way, once you make the decision that an 8-foot ceiling that was done in 1950 was just not adequate for you today, I want to do 10-foot ceilings. As soon as you make that decision, your whole house, all the walls of your existing house are coming down anyway. And then it just becomes a matter of does the foundation that's existing, and typically, of course, a one-story house built in the 50s would not support a second-story load. So it's pretty easy and quick to get from here to the decision of tearing the house down. However, if you've done some work on the house, let's say 5 years ago you redid your kitchen, and you spent a lot of money on that, it's hard for people to put their mind around the idea of tearing that out and tearing it down and building a new house. So in that instance, it probably would be wise to hang on to what you have and add on to it. But what would be very helpful in that decision process is getting an architect. And we don't do additions, but we can refer a lot of good people to you that have architects that do additions, and get somebody out to your property and eyeball what you have and get some firsthand advice on which way to go.
Todd, a similar question. When you walk through a house, when you look at them, how do you decide if it's really fixable and going to be suitable for today's buyers, or it just doesn't make sense?
I use a simple rule of thumb on one hand. Is there functional obsolescence? No matter what genius ideas that I might come up with, it still just doesn't work. And that's a tough balance, because we're trying to, of course, appeal to a buyer pool that isn't going to buy Doug's and Phil's $4.5, $3.5, $5 million home. The homes that we're dealing with are $1.5 million to $2 million. So there is an expectation that is different for a new home versus what I am providing into the market. But functionality is number one. Use of the home on the lot. So is the home on the lot one that makes the lot usable and the home usable? If the home is situated in a way that I cannot use the lot to my maximum opportunity, then that would be the second thing that I would say I would use in not wanting to rehab the home. And third is, can I make it what I believe is going to be workable for today's standards at that price point? So again, it's a mix that I use in analyzing that property.
There's a lot of reasons to build a house and not to build a house, and stress certainly is one that comes into play. So how do you manage the stress of clients when they're dealing with time delays and cost overruns?
I use the word consultative when describing interviewing with your contractor, because you want to make sure that you have somebody that's willing to explain and teach and walk you through all of the reasons why that happened. Years ago, I'll never forget, it was in 1994, we did a revamp of our company, and we came to the conclusion that we need to educate every single client. And it's not the same teaching lessons that we give them, it's just that every client asks different questions, and we need to have the demeanor to be consultative and educate the people. So Ed, that's what we find to be the best, is to be consultative.
And Phil, can you tell us about the range of roles a designer gets involved in? When should they get involved? At what level? Assuming there are budget constraints.
Typical interior designer would get involved in a very early stage. Quite often we'll get in a project where the existing tear down is on the lot, or Doug's home that he talked about, the 1950s 3-2 is on the lot, and there's initial architectural plans being developed. We will get in from the very beginning and work in a level that's called interior architectural detailing. And when I referenced earlier about space planning and looking at an architect's plan, looking at the way things are allocated, the kitchen's plan, the door placement for how the bed's going to go in the window, how the bed's going to go into the bedroom with the window placement, and is there a good bed wall? We'll run through all those checklists to make sure the plan's architecturally sound. So that's an interior architectural first level. And then the second level is picking out all the interior surfaces, the cabinetry designs, the appliances, the tile, the plumbing, everything you see from the front when you open the front door. And that's also kind of a part of the interior architectural detailing. And then stage 2 would be the decorating aspect of it. So what do your soft furnishings look like, your window coverings, your sofa, your art, your area rugs. That's really the second biggest section that a designer would help in. Little section in between called project management, where a designer might pick out a lot of those things for you, and then the owner wants to hire the designer to help execute those in the field in conjunction with the team members and the contractor.
So this is for Doug and Patrick. We've seen a transformation of architectural styles locally and I guess abroad as well. Do you have any prediction on where you think the next trend is going? And I'll state that if you're paying attention out there, we've moved from heavy Mediterranean in the 2000s and 90s to beach plantation, coastal transitional, and contemporary. What do you see as next?
The homes that we design in our company, we have variations, but the modern home we're seeing was very clean lines, glass, almost the type of home that you wouldn't think as a home and doesn't have the warmth of a home. That's changing to where the desire to have a very modern home, but to warm it up. So the choice of materials, you're seeing more wood, you're seeing more of a raw steel, choice of stone instead of the bright white marble floors. That's one aspect of the modern architecture. And in the traditional, something we're working on now and is kind of fun, is we're doing a modern farmhouse. So you get a farmhouse that has an architectural style true to its form back east, and then you introduce some of the straight lines that you have in a modern home, and they really complement each other and have a very nice look. Now I'm seeing that request in a French Normandy, where they want to have a combination modern French Normandy. Sounds interesting. We're yet to see what that's going to look like. Modern with regards to Spanish Mediterranean. So that's kind of what I call a hybrid. We're seeing a lot of requests for that right now, and where that's going, we don't know. If you get on and you start to Google it or do it on House, you don't really see a lot, but the request is there. Whether it's going to come to the South Bay and stick, I don't know.
How about you, Doug? You you stayed in the traditional vein and Mediterranean and all those. What do you see trending in the future?
We do a lot of work in Palos Verdes Estates, and in that city, the Mediterranean vernacular is still done all the time. Spanish colonial, Italianate, French a little bit, Tuscany, etc. But in Manhattan Beach, it seems like those styles have gone by the wayside a little bit. I do have one Spanish house going on right now in Manhattan Beach, and it's going to be I think it's going to be a nice house. But as far as what's in the future, I like Patrick's answer about kind of a warm feeling contemporary house. I think you're going to see a lot more of that style. The beach plantation, I personally have done it to death myself. So it probably will be around for a little while, but I don't know. It's a style that there's so much of it on the market right now that if you're building a home for yourself, you probably would not want to do that for that very reason. I think the farmhouse style is something that's going to have some legs here soon, and we see more farmhouse styles. And I have a house going on in the tree section that's a kind of a Northern California winery type feel with stone and a metal roof and kind of that vernacular, which I think is going to be a lot of fun. So we might see more of that in the near future as well.
Todd, you built your own home. You renovated some others. If you could pick one thing to avoid, a mistake you or you've seen others make, what would it be?
Spending too much money on things you don't need. So how do you draw that line? That takes a lot of knowledge, persistence, and discipline. So I said to somebody before the event started, it is an extremely disciplined process. So if you have the discipline to design and build your own home with these experts, it can be a great result. But it also can create a divorce, a heart attack, a lot of things. So I would say use your discipline.
Phil, same question.
I would say if you're in the throes of making decisions, one of the biggest mistakes you can make is drinking wine and throwing out your materials and inviting your girlfriends over and asking for their opinion. That creates angst, anxiety, problems with your interior designer who has worked very hard to keep you on a single path. And there's a lot of honesty in that answer. Asking too many opinions. Let someone grab the steering wheel with you. You can have a hand on it, but someone's got to control this, and everyone's going to have an opinion, and it's just going to cause so many issues. So I promote drinking wine, just not permit too many opinions. And I think we've talked a little bit about planning. If you want the home finished, you do have to plug into your budget the interior furnishings. You can wait 2 years. We'll do lots of projects where the client will build the home and then furnish it or get it where they want 2 years later. That's okay. Sometimes you just need a break from all the decision making. But don't forget to budget that into the bigger picture, and also just be careful of trends and theme decorating would be my final comment.
Patrick, same question. Number one thing to avoid.
I'm going to double up on something Doug said. When you're designing the home, you don't need to design the biggest home. Make sure, as he said, you write down your wants and needs and identify what size home it is you need, so you're not doing this over elaborate home where you're spending money on square footage where that could go into your selections. On the flip side, when you're designing a home, and if you're sacrificing not doing a room because you just want to save the money, but you really want the room, you've got to make sure you want that and that you go for that. Real quick story, my wife and I, we've designed and built 2 homes. We're doing our 3rd now. On our first home, we had on a hillside, we had the opportunity to tear down a garage in the back, which would have gave us a beautiful family room and beautiful doors to go out to it. But there was a $30,000 cost to take that garage and put it under the hill and drive into it as a under the hill. We were 24 at the time. I wish I would have done it. It was a mistake, because as 5 years went by and we started having kids, the backyard would have been fantastic to interface with the house, but we made that mistake. So just there's a fine line to not build too big, and then also if there's something you're not doing, make sure you don't make that choice incorrectly.
And Doug, same question.
I think just be realistic with your budget. I think the way that Ed started the meeting with those 13 points about things that sometimes are forgotten was very good information. So be realistic with your budget. Be disciplined, as Todd was saying. Save some money at the end for landscaping. Landscaping always seems to suffer at the very end. So if you stay disciplined, stay on point, then it doesn't have to be a real stressful experience. I've had clients who've really enjoyed building their house and have done it multiple times. But just be realistic and make sure you have a line item for everything.
Great. You have a ton of experience up here. I do want to open the mic to anybody who has a question, so if you just raise your hand and ask. You know, you've come out here, you've got 10, 15 minutes with these guys. This is your opportunity to get some free information. So we'll start right there. The question is, with the architectural firms that are here in the South Bay, is it architectural only, or is it architectural and design together? And Doug, I'll let you answer that question first.
I think my office is probably pretty typical of in the South Bay. We do not have a designer on staff. I believe maybe there might be a couple architects that do, but most do not that work in the South Bay. And we would typically refer you to an interior designer depending on what style of house you want to do. And Phil Norman here would be a great selection because he is a very talented guy.
Patrick, same question, because I know you're a little different.
We did have an in-house interior designer for about 5 years, but we found out that the personality of our clients and that one interior designer wasn't a match. So now we work with about 5 or 6 different interior designers that, depending upon the client, we introduce that that connection between interior designer and client. So as far as the South Bay, I don't know a lot of firms that do have interior designers inside.
I will say there are firms out there that are called design build, and that sometimes, not always, because people like to use that name, sometimes means they design and build at the same time. But good question. In the back corner, there's a significant difference between spec homes and custom homes. So if you go to a spec home, these builders that are building them, for the most part, exercise control. They're all about budget. They're about they set a budget, and their goal is to come in under it. And sometimes they do. A homeowner sets a budget, and as Patrick stated earlier, it's guaranteed to go over. So when you walk through a custom home, you're going to see all the different upgrades that homeowners have chosen. Some are wise choices, some are poor choices, but there's no question that a custom home is going to cost significantly more than most spec homes. There's exceptions to every rule. I'm sure some spec builder can say that he puts in every custom feature any custom homeowner would, and he'll show you his budget that he did. But for the most part, custom homes definitely cost a lot more. So the question is, should the homeowner who's hiring a builder get involved with the bid selection process? It's a great question, Patrick.
What we like to do is create an open book policy where we will share with you, if we get 2 bids, the 2 numbers. If we get 3 bids, we'll share that as well. Sometimes we will only work with one selected sub because it's specific to the project, might be the demolition contractor or the cabinet maker. But we do share those numbers with the homeowner, but as far as the homeowner making the decision, that's not typical. The reason, it could be that we know how they performed on their last job, or the job that they're about to do, they're more likely to be the better person. But we do not base it on cost. And if we do not have a client get involved to the degree that I believe you're asking.
There's usually best if there's one chef in the kitchen making those decisions. Homeowners getting involved in choosing the subs usually ends up being a nightmare. just from experience. But if you are somebody that wants to be heavily involved and you want to make those decisions, you just have to find a builder that's willing to cooperate with you on your level. Any more questions? Right here, front row. Where do you start this process? I'm gonna go to you, Doug, because you're in a pretty early phase.
I would say that usually architects are the first phone call and the first appointment. And you might interview 3 or 4 different architects, but your first appointments would be with the architect. The architect typically refers the general contractor. Doesn't always happen that way. Usually multiple names are given of general contractors, of people that you feel would be a good fit for that particular client. But I think starting with the architect or a designer is the first place to start.
It's very difficult to get an honest price of what it's going to cost to build your home without knowing what you're going to build. You can't just walk in and say, I want a 3,200 square foot home. They need to know more details. So you sometimes have to go to that expense prior to finding out some of those answers. Right here. So the question is, where do property tax go when you tear down an existing home and build a new home? So with Proposition 13, if you've owned your home a long time, Proposition 13 keeps your tax base a little bit lower than real value. So if you're tearing down your home you've owned for 15 years, it's already got a step down tax basis. After you build your new home, the assessor will come out and reassess the property based on what you've added to it, but still recognize the step down in basis that you had. So if you believe your home is worth $5 million when you're done, it won't necessarily be taxed at $5 million. It might be $4 million. You just lost speaker? Oh. Because the step down in the tax basis. If you disagree with your tax assessor, there is a process that you can fight and argue, and there are companies that do that in town for you. Yes. I don't know the answer to that question on the 50% rule. Do either of you guys know if anything about not fully tearing down a house and saving 50% of the house to save on taxes?
Right, it's a tough question. What I believe you're looking at is the 50% valuation of the project. And if you're going to design a new, you're going to put a second story on, and you're going to remodel the existing. And if the calculations for the new work that you're about to do exceeds 50% of the current valuation of the home, then that's going to be deemed a new home. It's a difficult scenario because you have to go down and talk to the planner and make sure that you have not exceeded that. But that's my experience, is that it's the 50% valuation, and if you want to not have it deemed as a brand new home but a remodel, you've got to keep that calculation under the 50% with the scope of work that you're doing.
It will still change your property tax
Yes.
valuation. Absolutely. They are going to get you one way or another.
If you add square footage
Yes.
to the home, for that part that's increased, you'll pay a higher property tax.
Right here, sir. Yes, your property tax bill is broken into land improvements, yes.
The land does not change. It is purely based upon the improvement to the property.
I
Well,
I think anytime you get permits on a house, they do notify the tax assessor, and then you just have to check with the tax assessor on their rules of what they will assess or not assess on a higher tax base. Yeah, he's saying that if you don't increase over 50% in value on the remodel of your home, you don't have to comply with all of the new codes that are required for a new home construction. So that rule comes into play and costs way more than the cost of property tax, typically. It's a great question, and the answer is by interviewing the builder. The question was, who manages all these different people, these trades, these experts, these consultants that are on your job? And ultimately, it is your builder that you hire, And whether they have the knowledge and the wherewithal to do that, you have to do that research and interview them and ask them what aspects of these jobs that you want done have you managed in the past, and ask those type of questions. Have you managed a landscape plan or a greenhouse plan or whatever that might be? But it is your builder, and there are builders that manage all those tasks extremely well, and you just have to hunt and find them.
Let me interject one thing. I think when you're talking about the level of homes that are being built in the South Bay with these kinds of experts, as you have probably all learned tonight, there's a lot of components that go into it. In today's market, there are many professionals that do nothing but act as, I think a good word, as you defined, is your advocate, that oversees all of these aspects and everything from start to finish. But it helps you limit your time and your brain damage. But at the same time, it does cost money. Those professionals, they're very, very tried and true. I have a client right now doing that in Beverly Hills. So, they will spend $150,000 to $200,000 with that person. In the end, now we're not talking about a $3 million home, but we're talking about a $10, $11 million home. They probably save at least half of what they're charging you in the process of the entire construction.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Doug, you probably can answer that best. How long to get plans through the city?
Once your plans are completed by your architect, and that process by itself could be 3 months, it could be 6 months. But once those are completed and submitted to the city, this particular city, Manhattan Beach, is usually about a 4-month process.
What about Hermosa and Redondo?
Hermosa a little bit faster. I would say maybe 3 months, Hermosa, and I would say probably the same for Redondo.
Palos Verdes has the art jury. Is that a longer process?
Palos Verdes is a completely different animal. It's a long haul in PV, and you're lucky if you get all your approvals within a year for a new house in PV. It could be 2 years. But you have neighborhood compatibility, which is a public hearing, which could be a nightmare. It puts you at odds with your new neighbors before you even move into the neighborhood. It's tough. But Manhattan Beach doesn't have anything like that.
I'm going to take the last question here in the corner, but everyone on the panel is going to stay to answer any individual questions that you have, but I just want to be able to release the group on time if you want to get out of here. So how much time does Coastal Commission add? So let's just say you're building on the Strand and you have to get through the city. Is there a Coastal Commission involved, and what does that mean, and how long does it take?
There is. It takes about a month for that approval. So you can tack on another month to your project if you're within the coastal area.
Can neighbors cause delays in the Coastal Commission and voice complaints? And
I would say no. The answer to that's no.
typically no. Okay. All right, so we are going to wrap up the panel. Give them all a big round of applause. Thank you all for attending. Again, they'll stick around back here if you have any more questions. You all have little cards. If you could fill those out and leave those on your chairs, that would be great. Thanks again for attending.